Have you ever been judged before you even had the chance to speak? Imagine walking onto a plane, holding your child's hand, believing you've earned your seat in first class only to be told, you don't belong here. Now imagine the entire cabin watching, waiting, as your dignity is questioned not because of your actions, but because of your skin. In that moment, what would you do? Stay silent to protect your child from the cruelty of strangers, or stand up, knowing the price of courage can be humiliation. Dr. Naomi Carter, an accomplished black single mother and CEO, faced that choice at 30,000 feet. But one phone call, one act of quiet defiance, would change not only her life, but the very system that tried to shrink her. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about how grace can rise higher than hate and how one mother's calm strength grounded an entire flight. If you've ever been made to feel small for simply existing, this story will remind you how powerful your voice truly is. Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to follow the journey of Dr. Carter, a story that will make you feel, think, and believe again. Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Gate D17 shimmered with that dull morning light that always feels halfway between exhaustion and routine. Business travelers scrolled through emails. Coffee cups steamed. Announcements echoed like a heartbeat every 20 seconds. Dr. Naomi Carter adjusted her blazer and brushed invisible lint off her sleeve. Her son, Eli, clutched a small backpack with his initials stitched in orange. They had left home at 5:30, sharp. She had promised him pancakes at the hotel in San Francisco once they landed. Naomi wasn't a celebrity. She didn't look rich, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something that mattered. As the CEO of Solar Nova, a clean energy startup that had just crossed the $400 million valuation mark, she'd spent the last 8 years fighting to prove that sustainability and equity could live in the same sentence. Today wasn't business, though. Today was supposed to be a pause. A conference speech, yes, but also a chance to show Eli what his mom had been working for. When the loudspeaker called, Aerolink Flight 281 to San Francisco first-class passengers may begin boarding. Naomi smiled, squeezed Eli's hand, and stepped forward. The lead flight attendant, Rebecca Hayes, stood at the gate podium, her posture sharp, chin high. She scanned the line with that blend of politeness and suspicion that seasoned travelers could read instantly. "Good morning," Naomi said warmly, handing over her phone for scanning. Rebecca's polite smile froze halfway. Her eyes flicked from Naomi's dark skin to the small child beside her, then back to the glowing screen. Something changed in her tone. "Ma'am, are you sure this is your ticket?" She tilted her head, voice dipped in syrupy disbelief. Naomi blinked. "Yes, seat 2A and 2B. I booked directly through Aerolink." She tried to keep her voice even. Rebecca's brows lifted slightly, the kind of expression that pretended to be confusion, but carried accusation. "Sometimes our system upgrades by mistake," she murmured, glancing over Naomi's shoulder as though looking for someone else who fit the image better. "Let me just check with my supervisor." She waved over a tall man in a navy vest, Grant Moore, the gate supervisor. He had that calm, managerial smile that always looked like it had been trained in a mirror. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. Rebecca turned her tablet around. "Possible upgrade error. Passenger Carter, 2 first-class seats." Grant leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice, but not enough that others couldn't hear. "Ms. Carter, can we step aside for just a quick verification?" "It's standard procedure." People behind them shuffled impatiently. Eli tugged his mom's hand. "Mom, are we in trouble?" Naomi knelt, just enough to meet his eyes. "No, baby, we just belong here too." She stood straight again, steady as stone. Inside, though, her stomach tightened. She had seen this dance before the soft denial disguised as policy. Grant gestured toward a side counter. Naomi followed, phone still in hand, while Rebecca stayed by the podium, lips pressed, watching. The secondary check took less than a minute. The scanner beeped green. "Valid first-class ticket," Grant said flatly, handing back her phone. But he didn't apologize. Instead, he just nodded once and motioned toward the boarding door. Naomi forced a small smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, guiding Eli toward the jet bridge. But as she walked, she could feel the heat of stares burning through her back. Curiosity, pity, judgment, all mixed in one uncomfortable silence. That silence followed her down the narrow bridge, between the hum of engines and the faint scent of jet fuel. Eli whispered, "Mom, why were they looking at us like that?" She exhaled slowly. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people see the color before the person." Eli frowned. "But that's not fair." "No," she said softly. "It isn't." Inside the cabin, the air smelled of leather and lemon polish. Rows of wide cream-colored seats gleamed under soft light. It should have felt luxurious, but instead, the space felt colder. Rebecca was already there, arranging headsets, pretending not to notice them. "Seats 2A and 2B, right this way," she said, voice clipped, eyes avoiding Naomi's. Naomi placed her purse carefully under the seat. Eli pressed his face against the window, marveling at the tiny service trucks below. "Look, Mom, they're loading luggage with a robot arm." Naomi smiled, grateful for his innocence. Moments later, Rebecca leaned in, tone sugar-coated again. "Ma'am, could you show your boarding pass one more time? Just a final confirmation." Naomi looked up. She knew this tone, the double check that meant disbelief, not security. She handed the phone again. Rebecca barely glanced before muttering, "We don't usually see single passengers with kids up here. It's mostly corporate." The implication landed like a slap. Naomi paused, every muscle taut. She took a breath. "Is there something wrong with having children in first class?" Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, not at all," she said lightly. "Just unusual. That's all." She turned, walking away before Naomi could answer. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man peeked over his newspaper, curiosity glinting behind his glasses. Eli tugged his mom's sleeve. "She skipped us for drinks." Naomi looked toward the aisle Rebecca had served everyone else, then moved on without even asking. "It's okay," Naomi said, forcing calm. Maybe she forgot. But inside, her heart ached not for herself, but for what Eli was learning too soon. As the plane filled, another attendant, Sophie Lynn, young, soft-spoken, her name tag slightly crooked, paused beside Naomi's seat. She hesitated, then whispered, "Ma'am, I'm sorry about earlier. I saw what happened at the gate." Naomi met her eyes. There was genuine discomfort there, and something like guilt. "You don't have to apologize for others," Naomi said gently. Sophie nodded, almost relieved to be acknowledged. I thought it wasn't right." Then she hurried back down the aisle before Rebecca could notice. For the first time that morning, Naomi's chest loosened just a little. Kindness, even whispered, could still find its way through walls. When the doors closed, Grant Moore stepped on board for one last sweep. Rebecca pointed subtly toward Naomi's row. Grant leaned down and said quietly, "Dr. Carter, I just want to make sure you're comfortable. If there's any issue, Please keep your tone calm." "All right." Her tone calm. The irony was too sharp to swallow. She looked up at him steadily. "I haven't raised my voice once. Mr. Moore." Then she turned away. Grant's smile thinned. "Of course." He stepped off the plane, leaving behind an aftertaste of authority, the kind that hides behind politeness. Eli looked at her again, worried. "Why do they keep checking everything?" Mom Naomi brushed his curls gently. "Because some people mistake quiet for weakness. But being calm doesn't mean you're small." The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Engines rumbled, a low thunder building beneath their feet. Rebecca passed through one last time, tightening seatbelts, eyes flicking over Naomi without a word. Naomi turned her face toward the window, pretending to watch the tarmac. But inside, a storm brewed. Anger pressed against her ribs like trapped air. She thought of the years spent proving herself investors who talked over her, reporters who labeled her the face of diversity rather than a scientist. She thought of every moment she'd swallowed her pride for professionalism. And now, all it took was one attendant's smirk to remind her how fragile belonging could feel. As the plane began to taxi, Eli leaned closer. "Mom." "Yes, baby." He hesitated. "Are we supposed to be here?" Naomi's throat tightened. She placed her hand over a small one and whispered, "We belong wherever we work hard to be. Never let anyone make you doubt that." Outside, the runway stretched like a silver ribbon into fog. The jet picked up speed, and Naomi Carter closed her eyes not out of fear, but to steady the storm inside. She didn't know that within the next 30 minutes, that storm would stop an entire aircraft and force an airline to face itself. The hum of the engine steadied into a soft vibration. Passengers adjusted their headphones, flipped open laptops, scrolled through morning emails. In row 2, Naomi Carter sat perfectly still, hands folded over her lap. Her nails dug into her palms where no one could see. The quiet was heavier than the roar outside. Rebecca Hayes moved through the cabin again. That same practiced smile, sweet to some, sharp to others. She stopped by row 3, asked if anyone wanted sparkling water, and skipped right over Naomi's row again. Sophie Lynn followed behind, balancing a tray of snacks. Her eyes darted toward Naomi, then toward Rebecca. For a second, their gazes met, one woman quietly asking, "Do I step in?" The other answering without words, "You already know what's right." Eli leaned close. "Mom, they didn't ask you again." Naomi didn't look up. "It's all right." Her voice was low, too calm to be natural. But Rebecca turned back suddenly, pretending surprise. "Oh, I missed you earlier, didn't I?" Her tone carried no apology. "Would you like something? Or maybe you brought your own." Several passengers looked up now, sensing the undertone but unsure whether to intervene. Naomi met Rebecca's gaze, polite and firm. Water would be fine. Rebecca's lips curved faintly. "Of course. Tap or sparkling?" "Sparkling. Thank you." When the attendant walked away, Eli whispered, "Why does she talk to you like that?" Naomi pressed his small hand. "Because some people forget how to see respect." Sophie returned with the bottle, placed it gently on the tray table, and murmured, "I'm sorry again." Naomi nodded. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Outside, clouds began to thicken as the jet gained altitude. The seatbelt sign dimmed. Naomi breathed out slowly, hoping the moment would pass. But prejudice never really stayed quiet. It always searched for a stage. Half an hour later, Rebecca was back with Grant Moore, the supervisor from the gate. He looked irritated, as though summoned from comfort. "Dr. Carter, he began in that clipped, managerial voice. I understand there's been some confusion regarding your seating. There hasn't, Naomi answered evenly. I'm in 2A, and my son is in 2B. Both confirmed at purchase. Yes, but apparently your ticket triggered a system flag, he said, lowering his voice, and the crew wanted to verify everything to prevent fraud. We've had cases, you know. Naomi tilted her head. Fraud. Because I'm a single mother in first class. Grant straightened. Ma'am, please don't make this about what Naomi asked quietly. About a pattern, about how my name and my skin seem to trigger your systems. The man's jaw tightened. I'm asking you to remain calm. If you become disruptive, Naomi exhaled through her nose, steady but trembling. You've mistaken calm for permission. Passengers nearby began to shift in their seats. One of them, a silver-haired man reading the Atlantic, muttered, She's not doing anything wrong. Rebecca's eyes flicked to him. Sir, please remain seated. The tension snapped like a wire. Eli's eyes brimmed with tears. Mom, are we going to get kicked off? Naomi forced a smile. No, honey, we're just being seen too loudly. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and pressed record. Her thumb hovered over the screen a moment before she spoke again, her voice steady but low enough to demand attention. This is Dr. Naomi Carter, on Aerolink Flight 281, being questioned about my right to occupy a seat I paid for. Grant's face flushed. You can't record on the plane. Ma'am. She met his eyes. I can document harassment. Rebecca stepped forward, voice sharp now. If you can't cooperate, we'll have security waiting when we land. Naomi didn't answer. She simply looked past them toward the cockpit door. The moment stretched thin, fragile. Then she reached for her phone again, not to record, but to call. Miles Freeman, she said under her breath. The line clicked after 2 rings. Naomi, his voice was groggy. It was barely 7, back in Denver. I'm on Aerolink 281, she said quietly. Headed to San Francisco. We're being profiled mid-flight. I'm sending you the recording. He paused, long enough to make both anger and control audible in his breathing. Stay seated. Don't argue. I'll handle it. Naomi felt a strange calm wash over her. Thank you. She hung up and placed the phone back on airplane mode. Across the aisle, Sophie watched in silence. She knew something significant had just shifted, though she couldn't tell what. Within minutes, the cockpit intercom buzzed. The captain's voice carried an age. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received a message from ground control requesting a temporary hold. We'll be pausing taxi and awaiting confirmation. Confused murmurs spread through the cabin. Grant frowned. Captain, what's this about? I don't know, came the reply through the open door. But we're not cleared to proceed. Rebecca shot Naomi a sharp look, suspicion cutting through her composure. Naomi rested her hands on her lap again. Seems your system's checking itself now. For the first time, Rebecca had no answer. 10 minutes crawled by. Cabin lights flickered to low power. People began asking questions. A child cried somewhere in the back. The flight attendants whispered among themselves, glancing nervously toward Naomi's row. Then the announcement returned, this time from a different voice. Calm, professional, female. This is Caroline Rivera, Vice President of Aerolink Operations. Flight 281 will remain grounded pending internal review. We appreciate your patience. Rebecca's mouth fell open. Grant turned pale. Naomi closed her eyes for a second, exhaling all the tension she'd been holding since the gate. Eli leaned closer. Mom, did you do that? She smiled faintly. No, sweetheart. I just started a conversation they couldn't ignore. The plane stayed still. Outside, ground staff gathered near the wing, pointing, talking rapidly into radios. Inside, whispers rolled like low thunder. Someone muttered, "Never seen anything like this." Rebecca moved toward Naomi again, but the authority in her stride was gone. "Dr. Carter, could you please step into the galley for a word?" Naomi turned her head slowly. "If you have something to say, you can say it here." Grant appeared behind her, red-faced. "This is highly irregular, ma'am." "So is discrimination," Naomi replied, voice steady. "But you've grown used to it, being invisible." Eli shifted closer to her side. "Mom, are we going to get in trouble?" She smiled down at him, brushing his curls. "No, baby. Sometimes, when you speak the truth, the world just gets uncomfortable." Behind them, the cockpit door opened again. The captain stepped out. Captain Andrew Mills, silver hair, kind eyes, posture weary. "Dr. Carter, I want to apologize. None of this should have happened. I've been informed our headquarters intervened directly." Rebecca stiffened. "Captain." He raised a hand. "Enough. Rebecca, you've said enough today. For a fleeting moment." Silence carried something new, not tension this time, but relief. Naomi met his gaze. "Thank you, Captain. That means more than you think." He nodded once and returned to the cockpit. Minutes later, 2 ground officials boarded the plane, their suits crisp, their expressions unreadable. They asked for Rebecca and Grant by name. The 2 exchanged bewildered looks before being escorted down the aisle. Passengers craned their necks, some filming discreetly, others whispering questions. Eli watched, wide-eyed. "Are they leaving?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Yes. Sometimes the sky has to clear before we can fly." The officials paused beside her. "Dr. Carter," one said, "on behalf of Aerolink Airlines, we'll be debriefing you privately once we land. Please know that the company takes this very seriously." Naomi inclined her head. "I hope you mean that." When they left, the atmosphere inside the cabin felt strange, like the moment after a thunderstorm when the air is still too heavy to breathe. Sophie came by quietly, a bottle of water trembling in her hands. "Ma'am, that was incredible. I don't know what you did, but thank you." Naomi smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. The truth has a way of finding volume." Sophie hesitated. "I want to help if they ask what happened." Naomi's eyes softened. "That's brave. Speak when it matters. It changes more than you think." The young attendant nodded, almost in awe. As the engines powered down completely, the captain's voice filled the cabin one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume flight operations once the ground review concludes. Thank you for your understanding." Naomi leaned back against the seat, finally letting her shoulders drop. Outside the window, the bright Georgia sun broke through a layer of thin clouds, casting long gold streaks across the tarmac. Eli rested his head on her arm. "Mom, does this mean we can't go to San Francisco?" She smiled, brushing his hair gently. "It means some journeys have to pause, so bigger ones can begin." Around them, passengers murmured approval. A woman 2 rows back said softly, "That was power with grace." Another man nodded. About time someone stood up without yelling. Naomi didn't respond. She simply stared out the window at the motionless wing, thinking about every woman before her who'd been silenced in smaller rooms. For the first time in hours, she felt the weight lift, not because justice had fully arrived, but because it had finally been seen. and above the steady hum of questions and whispers, Eli whispered one last thing, Mom. I'm proud of you. Naomi turned to him, eyes shining. Me too. Baby, me too. The cabin had fallen into that restless quiet only uncertainty could create. Passengers whispered behind half-raised magazines. The hum of the air vents was the only sound steady enough to trust. The jet stood still on the runway, engines idling, sunlight slanting across the window rows. Naomi Carter sat straight, breathing in measured counts. She could feel every second stretch, like the air itself was waiting for permission to move again. Her phone remained on airplane mode, but she imagined the messages already flying between executives. Miles Freeman had never been a man of delay. When he moved, doors opened fast. She wondered what he'd said, which board member he had called first. She pictured him pacing his Denver office, voice clipped, calm but lethal. It gave her a strange mix of reassurance and unease. She had spent years earning influence through data, persuasion, patience. Today, it was being wielded like a weapon. Across the aisle. Sophie Lynn poured coffee for a passenger with hands that trembled slightly. She kept glancing toward Naomi's row, her expression an uneasy balance between curiosity and admiration. Naomi met her eyes once, gave a small nod, the kind that said you're fine. Stay steady. Sophie nodded back, exhaling a breath she didn't know she'd held. Eli tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, everyone's looking again. Naomi turned toward him, brushing a curl from his forehead. Then we'll just keep looking forward. A few seats away. The man who had been filming earlier, later Naomi would learn his name, was David Lang, kept his camera angled discreetly toward the aisle. He whispered to his seatmate, I think something big's happening. That woman. She's calm like someone who's used to boardrooms, not drama. From the front galley came the sound of muffled voices. Rebecca Hayes had retreated there, her composure cracking at the edges. They can't just ground a flight because of her, she muttered to Grant Moore, who had been asked to stay on board until corporate finished the report. I did everything by the book. Grant rubbed his forehead. The book doesn't help when you're trending on social media. Rebecca. That guy in 2C's been filming since we left the gate. She froze. Filming. Oh, God. Grant sighed. You should have apologized. A quick sorry can save a career. Rebecca's eyes filled with something between anger and fear. She made me feel small, she said quietly. Grant looked at her, almost pitying. Maybe that's how she's felt her whole life. The cockpit door opened. Captain Andrew Mills stepped out again. The lines in his face deeper now. Corporate wants the plane secured until further notice. He announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, we'll begin deplaning once ground security clears it. A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. Someone groaned. Others murmured. Naomi felt Eli tense beside her. Are they kicking us off? He whispered. No, she said softly. They're waking up. Her words puzzled him, but he held her hand tighter. 20 minutes later, a pair of uniformed airline officials boarded. They spoke briefly with the captain, then made their way down the aisle. One of them carried a folder thick with printed messages. The other wore the expression of someone about to manage a crisis with cameras rolling. Good morning, passengers, the taller official said, stopping near the middle rows. My name is Caroline Rivera, Vice President of Operations for AeroLink Airlines. I know this delay has caused concern. I assure you we are handling an internal compliance issue. For safety and fairness, we will be speaking to certain crew members before resuming travel. Her tone was professional, but the implication hung in the air like thunder. Rebecca's face drained of color. Grant looked as though he wished he could vanish into the floor. Caroline approached Naomi's row. "Dr. Carter, yes. I'd like to personally apologize for the experience you've had so far. Our leadership team received your report." Naomi glanced toward Eli. "I appreciate you addressing it." Caroline nodded. "We intend to. Could we speak privately for a moment?" Naomi hesitated, then rose, leaving her bag and son behind. The cabin fell into a hush as she followed the vice president to the front of the plane. Inside the galley, Caroline's composure softened. "I just read the communication trail. The flag on your ticket wasn't a glitch. Someone at check-in manually marked it unusual profile. I'm deeply sorry." Naomi listened, jaw tight. Unusual how Caroline hesitated. The notation reads, "Single female with child, no travel history, first-class anomaly." It should never have been written. Naomi let the words settle, heavy as lead. Then this isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a system built to doubt people like me. Caroline nodded slowly. "I can't undo what's happened, but we'll take accountability. The staff involved are being relieved of duty effective immediately." Naomi breathed in, then out. "Thank you. But this isn't only about me. It's about everyone who won't be believed because they don't have a CEO to call." Caroline's eyes flickered with recognition. "You're right." From behind them, a voice interrupted Rebecca's, sharp and trembling. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. I followed procedure." Caroline turned. "You singled out a passenger because of bias. Procedure doesn't protect that." Rebecca's lips quivered. "I've been with AeroLink 12 years. Naomi met her eyes quietly. "Then you've had 12 years to learn respect." Rebecca opened her mouth to argue, but couldn't find words. She turned away, escorted by security moments later. When Naomi returned to her seat, passengers watched with a new kind of silence. Not the cold curiosity from earlier, but reverence, awe, and shame, all tangled together. David lowered his phone, finally stopping the recording. He said softly, "They're gone. You did that." Naomi shook her head. "Truth did that." Outside, a maintenance vehicle idled near the wing, its orange lights flashing. The sun had climbed higher, glinting off the silver fuselage. The entire world seemed paused between apology and redemption. Sophie approached again, nervous but smiling this time. "Dr. Carter, they asked me to stay on board. They said they might need my statement. I told them what I saw." Naomi's expression softened. "That's brave." Sophie shrugged. "You made it easier." Eli leaned across the armrest. "Curious. Mom, can we fly now?" Naomi looked toward the cockpit, where Captain Mills was speaking quietly into the radio. "Maybe soon," she said, "but sometimes the sky waits until people learn their lesson." He frowned, thoughtful, like detention for grown-ups. She laughed quietly. "Exactly." When Caroline reappeared, she addressed the passengers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. The issue has been resolved. We'll resume takeoff within the hour. Anyone needing to deplane may do so at the gate." No one moved. Perhaps no one wanted to miss what history felt like in motion. As the plane prepared to taxi again, Captain Mills made one last announcement. AeroLink Airlines would like to extend an apology to Dr. Naomi Carter and her son, as well as to all passengers for the delay. We are committed to fairness and respect at 30,000 feet and on the ground. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then strong enough to fill the cabin. Naomi looked down, half embarrassed, half grateful. Eli clapped too, eyes bright. "See," Mommy whispered. "They know now." She smiled at him, brushing a thumb across his cheek. Sometimes knowing is the beginning of change. The jet eased forward. The runway opened before them like a promise. Naomi leaned back, feeling the vibration return through the floor. The engines roared, louder this time, as though even the metal understood what it was carrying. When the wheels finally left the ground, she closed her eyes, not from fear, but from release. The city shrank below, sunlight spilling over clouds like forgiveness. She thought about how the story would look online, how the clip of Rebecca's confrontation might trend for a day or two, maybe spark another headline about bias in air travel. But beneath the noise, something deeper stirred the quiet conviction that this moment wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about drawing a line between dignity and silence. Eli squeezed her hand again. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. When I grow up, I want to build planes, ones that don't stop for bad reasons." Naomi laughed softly, a tear slipping free before she could hide it. "Then make sure they fly for everyone." He nodded seriously, as though signing an invisible oath. As the aircraft climbed into open sky, Naomi stared out the window, watching the light turn gold. She thought of her employees at Solar Nova, of the women she'd mentored, of the long meetings where she'd fought to have her voice heard. She thought of the message waiting in her inbox from Miles Handled. "Proud of you." Somewhere far below, the world moved on, but up here, above clouds and noise, Naomi finally felt still. She whispered more to herself than to anyone. Respect isn't a privilege. It's a right carved into the air itself. Eli was already asleep beside her, head against her arm. She smiled, whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, and let the hum of the engines drown out the memory of the gate. When the fasten seatbelt sign blinked off, Sophie came by one last time. "Would you like anything, Doctor?" Carter. Naomi looked up, her tone gentle. "Just water, and maybe a little peace." Sophie smiled. Coming right up." Outside, the sky stretched endlessly blue, and somewhere between departure and arrival, something had changed, not just for Naomi, not just for a company, but for everyone who watched and realized that silence, once broken, could make the whole world pause. San Francisco shimmered beneath the clouds, a mosaic of blue bay water and silver bridges. Flight 281 touched down with a low thud, rolling along the runway as though even gravity needed a moment to believe what had happened. Inside, the passengers remained unusually quiet, like a congregation leaving a sermon that had struck too close to home. Naomi Carter didn't speak either. She simply held her son's hand and waited for the seatbelt light to fade. Eli yawned, stretching. "Are we going to meet Mr. Miles now?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Not today, but I'm sure he's watching all this from a dozen screens." The captain's voice broke through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International. Local time is 10:27 m.m. Please remain seated as officials board the aircraft for a short debrief." A murmur rippled through the cabin again. Sophie Lynn paused mid-cleanup, glancing toward Naomi's row. She gave a tiny nod, one of respect. Naomi returned it, small and sincere. 2 uniformed officers stepped onto the plane, followed by a woman in a tailored gray suit, Caroline Rivera, now wearing dark glasses and a different expression, the one corporate executives reserve for damage control in public view. She approached Naomi slowly, stopping just beyond arm's reach. "Dr. Carter, thank you for your patience. We'd like to escort you and your son to the terminal conference room for a brief statement." Naomi rose without a word, gathering her things. Eli clutched his backpack tighter. Passengers parted as she moved down the aisle. Some avoided eye contact. Others smiled awkwardly. A few whispered words of support. "You handled that with grace," an older woman murmured as Naomi passed. Naomi paused, nodding slightly. "Thank you." As they stepped into the jet bridge, the air felt thicker, part humidity, part tension. Beyond the glass, Naomi could see a cluster of media vans already parked near the arrivals exit. Phones had done their job faster than any press release ever could. In the small conference room overlooking the runway, Caroline gestured for them to sit. Two corporate attorneys stood in the corner, their smiles rehearsed. A bottle of water sat on the table, condensation pooling beneath the label. Naomi didn't touch it. "Dr. Carter," Caroline began, "we want to reiterate our deepest apologies for the incident. Aerolink takes discrimination very seriously." Naomi tilted her head slightly. Do you take publicity seriously?" Caroline hesitated before answering. "Both matter, but we are determined to prove this won't happen again." Naomi studied her carefully. "That depends on whether you're willing to fix the culture, not just the policy." The younger attorney cleared his throat. "We'll be initiating mandatory bias training for all crew members." Naomi leaned forward, her tone still calm. "Training is good. Accountability is better. How many complaints like mine never reached your inbox?" Silence filled the room. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Caroline's fingers tapped once on the folder before her. "You're right," she said finally. "There's more we could do." Eli fidgeted beside her. "Mom, are we in trouble again?" Naomi smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. We're just making sure no one else has to feel small for no reason." Caroline's expression softened. "Dr. Carter, may we record your statement?" Naomi nodded. "You may, but I'd like to speak freely." "Of course." Naomi sat up straight, eyes steady. "I'm not angry for myself. I've been overlooked before, spoken over, doubted, dismissed. That's a part of existing in certain rooms when you look like me. But my son shouldn't have to learn at 10 years old that respect can be rationed. What happened on that flight wasn't an accident. It was the system showing its real face when it thought no one was watching." Her voice didn't tremble, but Caroline's did when she spoke next. "Thank you for saying that. You've given us perspective we can't afford to ignore." Naomi rose. Perspective doesn't change anything if it stays on paper. The older attorney extended a card. "If you'd be open to collaborating on diversity initiatives, Aerolink would be honored." Naomi took the card without looking at it. "Let's see what you do first." When they stepped out into the terminal, sunlight flooded the glass walls. The day was too bright for the heaviness still hanging over them. Sophie waited near the security gate, still in uniform, eyes red-rimmed from stress. She hurried over. "Dr. Carter, I just wanted to say, I told them everything. The gate, the words, all of it." Naomi reached out, squeezing her hand. "That was brave. Sophie, don't let anyone make you regret it." "I won't." Eli smiled at her. "You were the nice one," he said simply. Sophie laughed softly. "That means a lot. Buddy." Naomi thanked her again, then turned toward baggage claim. Cameras flashed in the distance. Reporters shouted questions she ignored. "Are you pressing charges? Do you plan to sue? Was this racial profiling?" Eli pressed closer to her side. "Mom, why are they yelling?" She took a deep breath, because sometimes the truth makes noise before it finds peace. By the time they reached the car service area, a familiar sedan waited at the curb. Miles Freeman stepped out, phone in hand, wearing his trademark calm that hid storms. He opened the door for them himself. "Naomi," he said, voice low but firm. "You okay? I will be." He nodded, helping Eli with his bag. Corporate reached out. Aerolinks in full damage control. They've grounded 3 flights while they review procedures. The board's demanding a full audit. Naomi blinked. 3 flights. "Yours was the first domino," he said quietly. "That video's viral. The public response is massive." Eli looked between them. "So, we stopped all the planes." Miles smiled faintly. "Just the ones that needed stopping." They drove in silence for a while. The city unfolding outside trolleys, glass towers, the glitter of water beyond the hills. Naomi watched the world pass by and thought about how easily a single moment could reveal a lifetime of imbalance. "Do you ever get tired of being calm?" Miles asked suddenly. She turned to him, surprised. "Every day, but anger costs too much energy." He nodded, understanding. "Still, I hope you know what you did mattered." "I didn't do it to matter," she said softly. "I did it so my son could see that silence isn't safety." When they arrived at the hotel, cameras were waiting again. Naomi paused before stepping out. "I can't hide from this. Can I?" Miles smiled. "You could, but then the story would belong to someone else." Naomi took his words in. Then she opened the door, took Eli's hand, and faced the crowd. Reporters fired questions. "Dr. Carter, are you filing a lawsuit? Do you plan to speak publicly? What message do you have for the airline?" She lifted her chin, voice even. "I believe in accountability, not vengeance. What happened on that plane was wrong, but change doesn't start with punishment. It starts with listening, and I hope the world is listening now." Flashes erupted, questions overlapped, but she didn't stay. She guided Eli through the revolving doors into the lobby, where quiet once again became her refuge. That evening, while Eli napped in the adjoining room, Naomi stood by the window overlooking the bay. Her reflection merged with the city lights. She picked up her phone, hundreds of notifications, messages from friends, strangers, journalists. One caught her eye, a message from Caroline. "We've launched a new initiative, Equal Skies. It started with your story." Naomi smiled faintly. Closing the phone, the world turned slowly outside, planes ascending into twilight. Somewhere in that hum, she felt something shift. Maybe not justice yet, but possibility. She whispered to herself, "We grounded more than a flight today. We grounded arrogance. In the next room." Eli stirred and mumbled in his sleep, "We belong here." "Mom." She walked over, brushed a hand across his forehead, and whispered, "Yes, baby. Always outside." Another plane lifted into the fading light, carving a silver line through the dusk, a reminder that even after turbulence, the sky always opens again. Morning light spilled through the curtains of the hotel suite, painting soft gold streaks across the floor. San Francisco woke slowly, but Naomi Carter had been awake for hours. She sat at the small desk by the window, a half-empty cup of coffee beside her, the glow of her laptop casting pale light across her face. Emails kept arriving, reporters requesting interviews, invitations to speak, brand offers disguised as sympathy. She scrolled through them all without replying. Behind her, Eli sat cross-legged on the carpet, building a tiny city with his Lego set. "Mom, can I make a plane that never stops?" he asked. Naomi smiled faintly. "If anyone can, it's you." He looked up, serious. "Do you think the lady from the plane learned her lesson? Her hand paused above the keyboard. "I think she's learning," she said softly. "Sometimes lessons come after we lose what we thought we deserved." There was a knock at the door. When Naomi opened it, Miles Freeman stood there, holding 2 coffees and a folder under his arm. His usual composure seemed lighter this morning. "Morning. Naomi, how's our headline hero?" She frowned. "Don't call me that." He chuckled. "Too late. You're on every major network. Aerolink released an official statement overnight. They suspended 3 managers and announced the Equal Skies Initiative. Your speech from yesterday's interview went viral, over 12 million views." Naomi leaned against the doorframe. 12 million people watch my worst day." "No," Miles corrected gently. Stepping inside, they watched what dignity looks like under pressure. You didn't raise your voice once, and somehow the whole world heard you louder than any protest. Naomi sighed, rubbing her temples. "I didn't mean to start a movement. I just wanted to fly home with my son." Miles placed the folder on the table. Movements never start because someone planned them. They start because someone refused to accept ordinary cruelty. Eli peeked up from his Lego city. "Mr. Miles, are they still talking about us?" Miles crouched beside him, smiling. "They're talking about how brave your mom is, and how strong you were sitting there, calm as stone." Eli grinned shyly. "I wasn't calm. I just didn't want her to cry." Naomi's heart clenched a little. She turned away toward the window before her son could see the tears forming. By noon, the calls intensified. News outlets offered flights to New York. Late-night shows wanted an exclusive. Nonprofit organizations reached out asking her to join their boards. She ignored them all until her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Something about the caller ID made her pause. "Dr. Carter." The voice was familiar, calm, deliberate. "This is Caroline Rivera from Aerolink." Naomi hesitated before replying. "Yes, I wanted to update you personally. We've completed the internal review. Rebecca Hayes and Grant Moore have both been terminated. We've also discovered the gate notation came from a pattern recognition algorithm in our customer verification system. We didn't just fail you, our software did too." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Algorithm." "Yes. The system uses travel history, purchase behavior, and demographics to flag anomalies. It appears that certain profiles, particularly minority passengers with limited frequent flyer records, were more likely to be marked as suspicious." Naomi felt the chill run through her chest. "You're telling me your company built a digital version of bias?" Caroline's voice faltered. "We didn't realize it until your incident brought it to light." Naomi took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "Caroline, I design ethical systems for a living. I've seen bias hidden in code before. But if that algorithm is still running, you're discriminating at scale." "I know," Caroline said quietly. "We've shut it down. But we'd like your help auditing the framework and creating oversight policy. Paid consultancy. Full authority." Naomi blinked. "You want me to fix the system that humiliated me?" Caroline exhaled. "Who better to rebuild it?" "For a long time." Naomi said nothing. Then she asked softly, "Send the documents. I'll think about it." When she hung up, she stared out the window again. The Bay Bridge glimmered in the distance, cars moving like silver threads through sunlight. She thought about every boardroom where she'd been told that fairness was too abstract to quantify. And here it was, unfairness written in code, measurable and cruelly efficient. By evening, she sat again at the desk, reviewing the files Caroline had sent. Lines of policy text, screenshots of data models, graphs showing disproportionate risk scores for black and brown passengers. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch, his small hand still gripping a Lego piece. Naomi whispered to herself, "If silence made this possible, then I have no right to stay quiet now." She opened a new document, typing slowly, deliberately, ethical compliance framework, passenger verification equity protocols. The work came easily, fueled by a mix of fury and purpose. Hours passed unnoticed until a soft chime sounded. A video call request. "Caroline again." "Dr. Carter," Caroline said, eyes tired but hopeful. "We've just finished the press release. Equal Skies goes public tomorrow. Would you be willing to stand with us at the announcement?" Naomi hesitated. "Standing beside you could look like forgiveness." Caroline nodded. It could also look like leadership. Naomi looked over at Eli, sleeping peacefully under a hotel blanket, unaware that the world had changed because his mother refused to shrink. "I'll be there," she said finally. The next morning, reporters filled the press hall at AeroLink headquarters. Cameras lined the walls. Microphones crowded the podium. Naomi stood beside Caroline, the company's logo shining behind them. The hum of conversation died as she approached the microphone. "2 weeks ago," she began, "my son and I boarded a plane believing we were just passengers. Instead, we became proof of what happens when bias hides in plain sight. What happened on Flight 281 wasn't only a failure of courtesy, it was a failure of design, of conscience, of courage. But if technology can amplify prejudice, it can also amplify justice." She paused. The cameras clicked. "I've agreed to partner with AeroLink to rebuild their verification system to ensure dignity is no longer optional. This isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. Equality isn't a headline. It's a habit we must program into the world." Applause rippled through the hall. Cautious at first, then steady. Naomi stepped back. Heart-hammering. Caroline placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You just changed the way this company breathes," she whispered. Naomi smiled faintly. "Then maybe the air will finally feel cleaner." Later that evening, Naomi and Eli walked along the Embarcadero, the wind cool against their faces. Streetlights shimmered across the water. People passed by without staring now. A few even stopped to say thank you. Eli looked up at her. "Mom, are you famous now?" Naomi laughed softly. "Maybe, but fame isn't the goal, baby. Change is." He nodded, thoughtful as ever. "When I grow up, I want to make computers that don't judge people." Naomi wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Then the world will need you." They stood there a long time, watching planes glide silently over the bay, their lights like moving stars. For the first time since that morning in Atlanta, Naomi felt peace fragile, but real. Back at the hotel, as Eli slept again, she drafted a message to Miles. "Equal Skies launched. They asked me to lead the ethics division. I said yes." His reply came within minutes. "Knew you would. The world's better because you got on that plane." Naomi smiled, closing her laptop. She turned toward the window, whispering, "Sometimes the worst day gives birth to the right one." And outside, over the sleeping city, another flight lifted into the night, unhindered, unjudged, and, for the first time in a long while, equal. 3 months had passed since the morning that changed everything. The world had moved on, at least on the surface. Airlines issued new statements. Corporations held diversity panels. Hashtags faded, and the internet turned its gaze elsewhere. But for Dr. Naomi Carter, the change had only deepened. She was no longer simply the woman from Flight 281. She was now the lead consultant of AeroLink's new Ethics and AI Oversight Division, a position that didn't exist until she forced the company to see itself. The new office in Denver overlooked a wide stretch of blue sky. From her window, Naomi often watched planes drift by, each one a reminder that progress was fragile, always in motion, always in need of steering. Eli had adjusted quickly. He talked about algorithms and airplanes now as if they were superheroes in disguise. Every week, his teacher asked him to explain to his classmates what his mother did. She fixes things people don't see. He told them proudly. Naomi never corrected him. That description felt truer than any title on a business card. That morning, Caroline Rivera stopped by Naomi's office with 2 coffees and a folder. Her once perfectly composed face carried lighter lines now, traces of humility shaped by hard learning. "Good morning. Naomi, I thought you'd want to see this." She handed over a report stamped in bold blue Equal Skies Initiative quarterly results. Naomi flipped through the pages, eyes scanning the numbers. Complaints down 87%. Passenger satisfaction up 42%. Bias-related system flags reduced to 0. For a moment, she felt an ache rise behind her ribs. Not pride, but relief. "It's working," Caroline said quietly. "The code review, the human verification layer, it's all working." Naomi smiled faintly. "For now, systems behave until people forget why they matter." Caroline nodded. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. The board wants to expand Equal Skies internationally. They're asking you to present at the Global Aviation Ethics Summit in Washington next month." Naomi leaned back, folding her arms. "A summit?" Caroline grinned. "Yes, you, me, the FAA director, several CEOs, and," she hesitated, "Rebecca Hayes asked to attend privately." Naomi's expression stilled. "Rebecca." "She reached out. She's been through counseling, diversity training, everything we recommended. She asked to meet you." For a long moment, Naomi said nothing. She looked out the window, watching a distant plane carve a white trail across the horizon. "I'm not sure what I'd say to her." "Maybe you don't have to say much," Caroline offered. "Maybe she just needs to listen." Naomi didn't answer, but the thought lingered. That evening, after work, she and Eli walked home through the park. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. Eli raced ahead, arms stretched wide like airplane wings. "Mom, when we go to Washington, can I come too?" She smiled. "Maybe. Why?" "Because I want to see you teach them how to be nice." Naomi laughed softly. "I'll do my best." At home, she prepared dinner, simple pasta, salad, lemonade. It felt good to live in the ordinary again. But later that night, as she tucked Eli into bed, her phone buzzed. A message from Caroline Rebecca sent a letter. "I thought you should read it before deciding about the meeting." Naomi opened the attachment slowly. "Dear Dr. Carter, I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope for understanding. What I did was more than unkind. It was ignorant. I've spent months confronting the parts of myself I didn't know existed. I grew up believing I was fair because I followed rules. But fairness isn't about rules. It's about awareness. You showed me that, even though it cost you peace that day. I want to thank you for your composure when I gave you none. If you agree to meet, I'll come to you. No cameras, no statements, just truth." Naomi read it twice, then once more. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. And that, she realized, was rare enough to be worth answering. 3 days later, she met Rebecca at a quiet cafe near downtown. The woman looked smaller somehow, her confidence replaced by something fragile but real. "Dr. Carter," Rebecca began softly, "thank you for agreeing to see me." Naomi studied her a moment before sitting. "You can call me Naomi." Rebecca exhaled. "I don't know how to start." "Start with honesty," Naomi said. Rebecca nodded. I've replayed that flight in my mind every night. The things I said, the way I looked at you. I told myself it was about procedure, but it wasn't. It was about fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of losing control. You didn't fit what I thought first class looked like. That's on me. Naomi listened quietly, letting the silence fill the space between them. Rebecca continued, her voice trembling. The day I was fired, I told myself you ruined my life. But the truth is, you forced me to face it. I had power I didn't deserve, and I used it to hurt someone who did nothing wrong. Naomi's eyes softened, though her tone remained steady. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life. I wanted the system to stop protecting cruelty with politeness. Rebecca nodded. You did that, and I'm trying to make sure I never forget why. For the first time. Naomi smiled faintly. Then maybe something good came from all this. They spoke for another hour about fear, empathy, and what accountability could look like beyond headlines. When Naomi finally stood to leave, Rebecca reached out. Thank you for not hating me. Naomi met her eyes. Hate is too heavy to carry. But remembering, that's how we keep the sky honest. Later that evening, Naomi called Caroline. Tell the board I'll speak at the summit, she said. But I'm not talking about technology. I'm talking about humanity. When the day of the summit arrived, the hall was filled with delegates, journalists, and industry leaders. Cameras rolled as Naomi stepped to the podium. Eli sat in the front row beside Caroline, swinging his legs nervously. Naomi began slowly, her voice low but clear. Every system is built by people, and people bring their fears into the things they create. Flight 281 taught me something simple. Progress without empathy is just automation. The algorithms that decide who belongs will always reflect the people who write them. So the next time you design a rule, a policy, or a code, ask yourself, does it protect fairness or does it protect comfort? The audience listened in silence. Some took notes, others simply watched, their expressions shifting as her words sank in. She concluded, I don't want to live in a world where equality is a checkbox. I want to live in one where it's instinct. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, but the kind that carries gratitude. Afterward, reporters approached, but Naomi waved them off. She only cared about the look in Eli's eyes, pride, wonder, and something like understanding. As they left the building, Caroline caught up with them. You were brilliant, she said. Naomi smiled. It wasn't brilliance. It was truth. That night, from their hotel balcony, Naomi and Eli watched planes taking off one by one, streaks of silver against a darkening sky. Eli leaned on the railing. Mom, remember when you said silence isn't safety? Yes. He grinned. Then I'm never going to be quiet when something's wrong. Naomi laughed, pulling him close. Good, because the world needs voices that don't flinch. In the distance, a plane's lights blinked as it climbed higher, the hum fading into the stars. Naomi whispered, almost to herself. Maybe now the sky remembers what fairness feels like. Winter crept into Denver softly, like fog moving through glass. The city lights shimmered against the snow, and from the window of her townhouse, Naomi Carter could see her reflection merge with the skyline, half woman, half memory. It had been nearly a year since Flight 281, the day the world learned her name. The headlines had faded now, replaced by new scandals and fresh promises from other companies trying to prove their progress. But the Equal Skies initiative remained alive, expanding beyond AeroLink into other industries. It had grown from a corporate apology into a movement of framework that governments were beginning to study. Naomi had become both its architect and its conscience. That morning, she sat at her dining table, reviewing reports from the Global Aviation Board. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. Eli was at school, and the silence felt too large without him. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the glass, whispering that the world was still in motion even when she stood still. Her phone buzzed. Caroline Rivera's name appeared on the screen. Naomi answered immediately. Naomi, I'm calling about the international rollout. The European board wants you in London next week. Naomi pinched the bridge of her nose. That's soon. They're holding a press conference. They want your signature on the partnership documents. Naomi hesitated. Caroline, you know how I feel about appearances. This can't become about branding. Caroline sighed. I know, but they see you as the symbol of change. You're the reason we even have this chance. I'm not a symbol, Naomi said quietly. I'm a reminder. Caroline paused, then softened her tone. Sometimes reminders keep doors open longer than speeches do. Naomi smiled faintly. You're learning how to argue like me. I had a good teacher. After the call ended, Naomi stood by the window again. Snowflakes drifted past the glass like tiny pieces of calm. She thought of the day she'd met Rebecca Hayes at that cafe months ago, the way the woman's hands had trembled as she spoke about accountability. Since then, Rebecca had written her several times short updates about volunteering at youth programs, mentoring other attendants, rebuilding her life quietly. Naomi always responded with grace, but rarely with detail. Forgiveness was a bridge she was still crossing. That evening, when Eli returned from school, he burst through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold. Mom, guess what? Our class is writing letters to people who make the world fairer. I picked you. Naomi laughed softly, pulling him into a hug. You could have picked Dr. King or Rosa Parks. I know, he said seriously, but they're in books. You're in my house. Her chest tightened. That's the best compliment I've ever had. He grinned. I even wrote the title already. The Day My Mom Made the Sky Stop. Naomi smiled, blinking back warmth. That's a very strong title. Eli looked proud. It's true, though. Later that night, after tucking him into bed, she found herself rereading the emails she'd ignored for days. Invitations, podcasts, conferences. Everyone wanted a soundbite, not a story. She closed the laptop, exhausted by the noise of progress. The next morning, as she prepared for her flight to London, she received a message from Caroline marked urgent. Attached was a news alert. Major airline data leak reveals global bias algorithm still active in partner systems. Naomi's stomach dropped. She scanned the details. Another airline, Eurasia Jet, had quietly adopted Aerolink's early algorithmic model before Equal Skies took effect. Their system had flagged hundreds of passengers for profile inconsistencies, the same prejudice, repackaged under another name. Moments later, Caroline called, Naomi, I just saw it. We didn't authorize this. They used old code without permission. Naomi's voice was steady but cold. Then the problem isn't just one airline. It's the culture of convenience. We can fix this, Caroline said. We'll issue a statement. No. Naomi interrupted. We'll issue a solution. That night, she worked through every line of code she could access, tracing the pattern of misuse. She saw how companies modified ethics protocols like optional features, choosing efficiency over integrity. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist in a storm. When dawn broke, she called Miles Freeman. His voice, as always, carried a calm authority. "Naomi, you sound tired?" "I'm awake," she said simply. "The algorithm we killed didn't die. It moved." Miles was silent for a long moment. "Then we go public again. But this time, we do it before anyone forces us to." Naomi nodded. "I'll handle the statement, but I want more than words. I want a coalition tech leaders, regulators, civil rights advocates. Equal skies can't stay in the clouds anymore." Miles agreed. "You have my full support." 2 days later, Naomi stood again before cameras, this time not as a victim, but as a reformer unwilling to be silent twice. The conference hall in London buzzed with journalists. Caroline stood beside her, composed, ready. Naomi stepped to the microphone. "When we built Equal Skies, we believed transparency was enough. It isn't. Systems don't fail quietly, they adapt. And when discrimination evolves, so must we. Starting today, we are forming the Global Ethics Consortium, a partnership between technology experts, airlines, and human rights organizations to ensure that fairness isn't a brand, it's infrastructure." Applause rose like a wave. Cameras flashed. For once, the noise didn't feel invasive. It felt alive. That night, in her hotel room overlooking the Thames, Naomi received a short email from Rebecca Hayes. "Dr. Carter, I watched your announcement today. I used to think change meant fixing the damage we caused. Now I see it means building a world where that damage never happens again. Thank you for teaching me that." Naomi smiled quietly. Maybe redemption wasn't a single act, but a ripple that reached further than intention. The next morning, Eli joined her at breakfast, excited about seeing London. "Mom, do you think they'll ever make a plane that flies without fuel?" "Maybe," she said. "But the real goal is making one that flies without bias." He laughed. "That sounds harder." "It is," she said softly. "But that's why we try." Later that day, as their car crossed Tower Bridge, Naomi watched the city unfold around them, history and innovation sharing the same skyline. She thought about her journey from that humiliating morning at Gate D17 to this moment on another continent, leading a conversation about equality that had refused to end. When their flight home lifted into the night sky, Naomi looked out the window. The clouds below glowed faintly under the moonlight, endless and soft. She felt Eli's small hand rest against hers. "Mom, are you happy now?" She took a long breath. "I'm not finished," she said, smiling, "but I'm closer than I was." As the engines hummed and the world turned beneath them, Naomi thought about the strange symmetry of life, that the same sky that once held her pain now carried her purpose. And somewhere between departure and destination, she realized that maybe the true measure of justice wasn't how loudly the world listened, but how deeply it remembered. Outside the window, the stars seemed brighter than usual, like they too were listening. Naomi closed her eyes, whispering to the dark, "Keep them honest, wherever they fly." And for a moment, the sky almost seemed to answer. Spring returned to Denver like a slow confession. The snow had melted, and the air carried the smell of renewal wet earth, young leaves, something that hinted at forgiveness. From her kitchen window, Naomi Carter watched the morning light spill across the city. Eli was at the table, finishing his cereal while humming a tune she didn't recognize. The house felt ordinary again, which, after everything, felt extraordinary in itself. A notification blinked on her phone. Caroline Rivera's name lit up the screen with a short message. "Board meeting at noon. Urgent." Naomi took a sip of coffee, bracing herself. Urgency never came without weight these days. When she arrived at the Aerolink Global office, the air was charged with quiet tension. Caroline stood at the glass wall overlooking the downtown skyline, her expression serious but not panicked. "Naomi," she said, gesturing her in, "we've just received something you need to see." On the large screen at the end of the conference room, a video played grainy at first, then clear enough to recognize. It was footage from another airline, a black passenger being escorted off a plane, his voice calm, his face composed. The flight attendants flustered. The caption beneath the viral clip read Flight 908, Déjà vu of discrimination. Naomi's heart tightened. Where was this Toronto? Carolyn replied, different airline, different system, but the same pattern, same justifications, same words. Naomi's shoulders tensed. So it's not just the code anymore, it's culture echoing itself. Caroline nodded grimly. Exactly. The media's calling it the second Flight 281. Reporters are already reaching out to you for comment. Naomi turned away from the screen, pressing her palms against the edge of the table. For a moment, silence filled the room. She remembered that same stillness, the heartbeat before the storm, the second before she'd hit record on her phone a year ago. The air had the same weight now. Finally, she said softly, we need to respond, but not with statements, with structure. Caroline frowned. Structure Naomi's mind was already racing. We've built equal skies into a framework, not a philosophy. Maybe that's the flaw. The world doesn't need another set of rules. It needs another language. Caroline tilted her head. Language? Naomi nodded. A way for people to talk about fairness that isn't reactive. Systems reflect silence. Caroline, they only change when language does. By that afternoon, Naomi was on a call with Miles Freeman, looping him in from Washington. If we let this repeat without reframing the conversation, we'll lose momentum, she told him. Miles listened, thoughtful as always. Then maybe the next step isn't policy, it's education. That night, Naomi sat at her desk long after Eli had gone to bed. Outside, the city pulsed quietly beneath streetlights. She began drafting what would become the foundation of a new movement, the Horizon Project. Its mission was simple but radical: train future engineers, flight crews, and executives to identify bias before it became practice. Not workshops, not compliance courses, but immersive empathy labs. She typed slowly, choosing each word with care. Justice must be designed as carefully as technology. 2 months later, the first Horizon Lab opened in Atlanta, the same city where her humiliation had begun. Reporters gathered outside the glass-fronted building as Naomi cut the ribbon beside Caroline and Miles. Behind them, a group of students from local universities held signs reading, "We belong in every seat." A young woman approached Naomi after the ceremony, voice trembling slightly. "Dr. Carter, my mother was on Flight 281. She said she never forgot your calm that day. She told me to study computer science so I could build systems that see everyone." Naomi felt something shift in her chest, a quiet sense of full circle. "Then your mother already changed the world," she said gently. Over the following weeks, the Horizon Project spread faster than anyone predicted. Universities requested partnerships, major airlines volunteered funding, and even governments began asking for consultation. Naomi found herself in rooms she once only dreamed of entering, not as the token voice of diversity, but as the architect of a new ethical standard. And yet, with every success came a familiar unease. The more people praised her, the more she worried that admiration might replace action. Late one evening, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, staring at the dark outline of the mountains. Eli joined her, holding his blanket like a cape. "Mom," he asked sleepily, "are you still fixing the sky?" Naomi smiled, trying to. He yawned. "Do you ever get tired all the time?" She admitted. "But the sky's worth the work." Eli nodded solemnly, as though her words were a promise. "Then I'll help when I'm big." Naomi laughed softly. "Deal." A week later, Naomi was invited to speak before the United Nations Technology Council in Geneva. The theme, Ethics Beyond Borders. Her speech became one of the most viewed of the decade. "Discrimination," she said to the crowded hall, "isn't a software bug, it's a mirror. We can fix the code, but if we never fix what the code reflects, it will find a new way to discriminate. Justice isn't born in courtrooms or headlines. It's born in how we design, how we hire, how we see. Flight 281 wasn't a scandal. It was a signal, a reminder that the first-class seat isn't about luxury. It's about dignity." The hall erupted into applause, but Naomi barely heard it. What mattered wasn't the clapping. It was the tears in the eyes of a few listeners who truly understood. After the session, a man approached her, tall, early 40s, wearing an airline pin she didn't recognize. "Dr. Carter," he said, voice low. "I was a pilot the day of Flight 281. I didn't speak up when I saw what happened. I told myself it wasn't my place, but you changed that. I just wanted to say thank you for showing me what silence costs." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. It's never too late to start speaking. When she returned home to Denver, she found a small envelope waiting in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. "The skies are clearer because you made us look up." Signed simply R.H. She folded the note carefully, pressing it to her chest. There was peace in that small gesture, not closure, but acknowledgement. That night, Naomi and Eli stood outside again, looking at the stars. The air was cool, and the world was quiet in a way that felt earned. Eli whispered, "Do you think the sky remembers you?" Mom Naomi thought for a moment, her eyes tracing the faint line of a distant airplane crossing the horizon. "I don't think it remembers me," she said finally. "I think it remembers what we learned together." As the plane disappeared into the dark, she whispered a prayer not of gratitude, but of hope. Hope that every voice silenced on the ground would one day be heard in the air, and somewhere above them, where night met dawn, a light blinked once like the sky nodding in agreement. The summer heat in Denver arrived with unapologetic brightness. The city's skyline shimmered under the high sun, and the scent of fresh rain from the previous night still lingered in the air. Inside her office, Dr. Naomi Carter leaned over a stack of reports, the blinds half closed to soften the glare. She had been awake since 5, unable to quiet her mind. A year and a half had passed since Flight 281, yet its echoes still shaped everything she touched. The Horizon Project had expanded to 8 countries. Its symbol, a small silver wing, etched with a circle, now appeared on every new Aerolink aircraft. But progress, Naomi had learned, was never linear. For every wall torn down, another appeared somewhere else. Her phone buzzed softly. A new message appeared on the screen. Urgent call from the U.S. Senate Committee on Transportation Ethics. Naomi sighed and picked it up. "Dr. Carter, speaking." A measured voice greeted her. "Good morning, Dr. Carter. This is Senator Albright. We'd like to invite you to testify before Congress regarding algorithmic discrimination in passenger systems. Your reforms have sparked federal review." Naomi hesitated. "You want me to testify?" "Yes," the senator said. "Not just as a witness, but as an expert. The committee believes your insight could guide legislation." She glanced at the framed photo of Eli on her desk, his grin missing one front tooth. "I'll do it," she said finally. That evening, she met Caroline Rivera for dinner at a quiet restaurant near Union Station. Caroline looked tired, but content. Her hair pulled into a loose bun, the lines around her eyes softened by time. "So," Caroline said with a grin, "Congress, that's quite the audience." Naomi smiled faintly. "It's not the audience I worry about. It's the intention. Governments love to listen when it looks good." Caroline raised her glass. "Then give them something worth listening to." The following week, Naomi flew to Washington with Eli. As the plane ascended, she looked out at the soft blue horizon, the same sky that once betrayed her. Eli pressed his face against the window. "Fascinated. It's like the clouds forgot how to be mean," he said. Naomi laughed quietly. "Maybe they learned." When they landed, a black car was waiting. The hearing was set for the next morning. Naomi spent the evening reviewing her statement, rewriting phrases until every word carried weight but not bitterness. She didn't want to relive the humiliation. She wanted to redefine what justice looked like after it. The next morning, the Senate chamber buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cameras lined the back of the room. Naomi took her seat, wearing a simple navy suit. Caroline sat behind her as support. Miles Freeman had flown in too, offering a nod from across the aisle. Senator Albright began. "Dr. Carter, thank you for joining us. We understand you've been instrumental in developing the Equal Skies and Horizon frameworks. Could you explain why you believe systemic bias persists despite these reforms?" Naomi adjusted the microphone. "Because bias isn't software," she said. "It's memory. It lives in habits, in unchecked assumptions, in the stories we tell about who belongs. We can update every program in the world, but if the people running them never question themselves, injustice just learns new code." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Another senator leaned forward. "So, what do you suggest?" Naomi met his eyes steadily. "Accountability that doesn't wait for scandal. Oversight that includes the people most affected. And most importantly, representation. If the table keeps missing half its seats, don't be surprised when the conversation keeps missing half its truth." A pause followed, deep and resonant. For the next hour, Naomi fielded questions, some thoughtful, some defensive, but she never lost her calm. Every sentence carried a quiet precision that silenced even her critics. When it ended, reporters crowded the steps outside, shouting questions about her experience. She answered none of them. Instead, she took Eli's hand and walked past the cameras toward the sunlit steps of the Capitol. "Did they listen?" Eli asked. She smiled. "Maybe not all of them, but enough." Back in Denver, the response was immediate. News outlets praised her testimony, calling it a masterclass in moral clarity. Online, the hashtag "The Sky Belongs" everyone began trending. Letters poured in pilots, teachers, even school children writing about how the story of Flight 281 had changed how they saw fairness. But one letter stood out. It came from a small town in Alabama, handwritten in blue ink. "Dear Dr. Carter," it began, "I'm a flight attendant. Last week, I stopped my supervisor from downgrading a passenger who didn't fit our VIP image. I remembered your story and realized silence would have made me part of it. Thank you for teaching me courage." Naomi folded the letter and slipped it into her journal. That night, she wrote beside it, "Change isn't when the world talks. It's when someone acts quietly and no one even sees it happen." Weeks later, Naomi received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Dr. Carter," the voice said softly, "this is Director Lang from the FAA. We'd like your help designing a federal ethics curriculum for aviation training. We want Horizon to become national standard Naomi's heart skipped. That's a big step. It's overdue, Lang replied, and it's yours if you'll take it. She looked out the window at the fading sunset. Then let's build something that lasts. Months passed in a blur of travel, meetings, and late nights. Naomi found herself constantly between World's corporate rooms and classrooms, board discussions and bedtime stories. Yet, through the fatigue, she felt a new steadiness in her life. One autumn evening, she and Eli sat in the backyard under a sky streaked with gold. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. Eli was older now, more thoughtful, his questions sharper. "Mom," he said, "do you ever wish Flight 281 never happened?" Naomi thought for a moment. "I wish it hadn't hurt so much," she admitted, "but I don't wish it away. Some storms clear the air." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe we needed it." She smiled. "Maybe we did." As night settled, her phone buzzed again this time. A short message from Caroline. The president just signed the Equal Skies Act. It's law now. Naomi stared at the screen, then looked up at the vast, starlit expanse above them. She whispered, "We did it, baby." Eli grinned. "You mean you did it?" She shook her head. "No, we all did." The following morning, she stood once more on a runway, the same airport where her journey had begun. Reporters gathered, cameras flashing. Behind her, a newly painted Aerolink jet gleamed white and silver, the horizon symbol near its door. She stepped forward, touching the cool metal of the fuselage, and whispered a quiet promise, "Never again." Carolyn joined her, smiling. "Feels like a lifetime ago." Naomi nodded. It was, and somehow, just yesterday. A voice from behind made her turn. It was Rebecca Hayes, dressed in the simple Navy uniform of a new airline that had joined the Horizon Coalition. She approached cautiously, her eyes shining. "I heard about the act," Rebecca said. "Congratulations, Dr. Carter." Naomi smiled. "Congratulations to all of us. We're finally flying, right?" They stood together as the engine started to roar, wind rippling through their hair. Naomi closed her eyes, breathing in the sound, a sound that once meant fear, but now felt like freedom. Later, on her flight home, she and Eli sat side by side in the same row number that once changed their lives. 3A. He looked at her, curious. "Mom, what does it feel like to change the world?" She laughed softly. "It feels like breathing after holding it too long." Outside the window, the clouds parted, revealing a vast expanse of light. The horizon stretched endlessly, the sky reflecting itself in quiet perfection. Naomi pressed her palm against the glass, whispering, "The sky belongs to everyone now." For the first time, it truly did. Autumn had returned, painting the Colorado hills in shades of amber and rust. Naomi Carter stood on her back porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since cooled. The sky stretched above her, vast and calm, the same sky that had once carried her humiliation and later her redemption. But today, it felt heavier, like it was waiting. For months after the Equal Skies Act passed, Naomi's life had been a storm of speeches, panels, interviews, and meetings. Yet when the noise quieted, the silence that followed was almost too sharp. Inside, Eli was finishing his homework at the dining table, his pencil tapping a gentle rhythm. He was taller now, his once round face leaner, his eyes brighter. Naomi watched him, realizing that while the world had changed, he was still the compass that guided her through it. The news played softly in the background. Another airline scandal, this time in Asia. A passenger removed from business class for security reasons. Naomi sighed. Change, she thought, was not a switch you flipped. It was a seed you had to keep watering, even when the soil refused to soften. Her phone buzzed again. Caroline Rivera's voice came through, warm but urgent. Naomi, are you free tonight? There's something we need to discuss. It's delicate. Naomi straightened. What's wrong? Caroline hesitated. It's the Global Ethics Consortium. The European Board is under investigation for mishandling funds. The press is linking it to Horizon's expansion budget. Naomi's chest tightened. They're accusing us. No, Caroline said quickly, but it's guilt by proximity. They're calling it the price of moral branding. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Naomi rubbed her forehead. I'll come to the office. When she arrived, the city was cloaked in twilight. The Aerolink Tower loomed above her, its glass exterior reflecting the deep orange of sunset. Inside, Caroline paced the conference room. The media's going to twist this, she said. We can't let the Horizon name become another PR tool. Naomi sat down, her mind already working. We won't fight it with statements. We'll fight it with proof. Transparency reports, public audits, full data disclosure. Caroline nodded. That could work, but it'll open every file we have. Naomi met her gaze. Then we make sure there's nothing to hide. For the next several days, Naomi worked without rest. She reviewed budgets, contracts, even the smallest internal memos, somewhere between exhaustion and resolve. She remembered the lesson her mother once taught her, that sunlight, no matter how harsh, never ruins what's meant to grow. On the 5th day, Caroline entered Naomi's office, holding a file. You need to see this. Inside were emails between a European director and a private investor, implying misuse of funds allocated for training programs. Naomi's jaw clenched. This is what kills movements, she said quietly. People who see justice as a brand, not a responsibility. Caroline placed a hand on her shoulder. So what do? Naomi's answer was immediate. We go public, not with blame, but with truth. 2 days later, Naomi stood again before cameras at a global press briefing. Integrity, she said firmly, means telling the truth even when it bruises you. The Horizon Project was built to challenge bias, not to profit from its solution. Today, we are releasing every document connected to our funding. No one is above scrutiny, not even us. The statement spread across every major network. Some praised her transparency. Others called it reckless. But within a week, the investigation cleared Horizon entirely. The public trust deepened, and Naomi's quiet courage became its own kind of currency. That evening, she and Eli celebrated with takeout noodles and laughter. Mom, he said, through a mouthful of food, you're kind of famous again. Naomi chuckled. Fame fades. Trust doesn't. He nodded solemnly. So you're like, famous for being honest? She smiled. That's the only kind worth having. Later that night, after Eli went to bed, Naomi sat on the porch again. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, all the victories, the losses, the endless work of building something that wouldn't collapse under the next storm. Her thoughts drifted back to the woman she was on that plane, the one who had stayed silent for too long before finally standing up. She wondered if that version of herself would recognize the woman she had become now. As she sat there, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Dr. Carter, I'm reaching out on behalf of the Smithsonian Museum of American History. We'd like to include your story in the Equal Skies Act in our upcoming exhibit, Voices of Modern Justice. Naomi's breath caught. She looked at the glowing message, tears pricking her eyes. The museum wanted to preserve what had begun as a single act of defiance on a crowded plane. She replied simply, "I'd be honored." Weeks later, she stood in the museum's new wing, Eli's hand in hers. The exhibit's centerpiece was a replica of an airplane cabin. Above it, etched in silver letters, were the words, "The sky belongs to everyone." A short film played nearby, showing news clips, interviews, and her speech before Congress. Visitors moved quietly through the space, many pausing to read the plaque bearing her name. Eli looked up at her, wide-eyed. "Mom, they made you part of history." Naomi smiled, though her voice trembled. "We made history, baby, you and me." As they stood there, a young girl approached, no older than Eli had been on that fateful flight. She looked shy but determined. "Dr. Carter." "Yes, sweetheart." The girl's voice quivered slightly. "I watched your story in school. It made me want to be a pilot." Naomi knelt down to meet her eyes. "Then you make sure your wings lift everyone," she said softly. The girl nodded solemnly before walking away with her parents. Naomi watched her go, heart swelling with a quiet ache that was both gratitude and hope. That evening, Naomi and Eli walked along the National Mall. The sun was setting behind the Washington Monument, the sky painted in gold and violet. Eli stopped suddenly, staring at a plane streaking across the fading light. "Mom," he said, "do you ever think about that first flight anymore?" Naomi took a deep breath. "Every time I look up," she admitted. "But now, when I remember it, I don't feel small anymore. I feel necessary." He smiled, taking her hand. "You made the sky better." She squeezed his fingers gently. "No, honey, we just reminded it to be fair." They stood there until the last of the light disappeared, the city humming softly around them. Naomi looked up once more, whispering a quiet prayer to the same sky that had witnessed her journey. "Stay kind," she said. "Stay open." And in that still moment, as the first star appeared, she felt it an invisible reply, a calm acknowledgement that somewhere between injustice and change, the sky had learned woe, too. The first snow of winter arrived early that year, blanketing Denver in white before Thanksgiving. Dr. Naomi Carter sat by the window of her study, watching the flakes fall in slow spirals, dissolving as they touched the warm glass. A candle flickered beside her, casting soft shadows across the papers spread on her desk notes, drafts, and letters from people around the world who had written to thank her for the Equal Skies Act. She had spent the past few months speaking less, teaching more, preferring classrooms to cameras. Fame had faded into familiarity now, and she was grateful for the quiet. Downstairs, Eli played a Christmas song on the old piano. His fingers had grown confident, finding melodies without needing guidance. Each note rose softly, weaving through the stillness like breath. Naomi smiled to herself, her heart full with the sound of ordinary peace. Her phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Caroline Rivera." Naomi answered with a warm, teasing tone. "Don't tell me you found another crisis. I just poured tea." Caroline laughed lightly. "No crisis this time. Just news. The Smithsonian exhibit's traveling to schools, libraries, and airports across the country. They're calling it the Sky Project. You'll be glad to know it includes the Horizon curriculum." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "So the lesson keeps moving." "Exactly," Caroline said. "We're sending wings where prejudice once flew." Naomi's eyes softened. "Beautifully said. How's the team exhausted but proud? We're closing the fiscal year without a single ethics violation. That's a record." Naomi chuckled. Never thought compliance would sound poetic. Maybe you made it that way. After the call ended, Naomi returned to her writing. She was working on a book, not a memoir, but a collection of essays titled Altitude and Grace. It wasn't about her success, but about what it meant to stay kind when the world wasn't. Each page felt like exhaling what she hadn't been able to say aloud on television, that justice wasn't always a victory march. Sometimes it was a slow walk through the fog, one step at a time, never knowing who might follow. That evening, Eli joined her on the couch, holding his tablet. "Mom, they showed your story at school again today." She smiled. "They did. What'd you think?" He hesitated. "I liked it, but it made me sad for the old you, the one on the plane." Naomi's expression softened. "That version of me made this one possible. Baby, every pain I carried turned into a reason to build better." He nodded slowly. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" She thought for a moment, gazing at the snow outside. "Sometimes, but I wouldn't trade her for the woman I became after." A silence settled between them, comfortable and deep. Then Eli looked up. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Of course. When I grow up, I want to design planes, ones that see every person the same way." Her chest tightened with warmth. "Then the world will fly differently because of you." A few weeks later, Naomi received an invitation from the United Nations Council on Human Dignity to deliver a keynote address at their global summit in Geneva. The theme, Beyond Equality, the architecture of respect. She almost declined public stages no longer thrilled her, but something in the title stirred her. Respect wasn't an abstract word to her anymore. It was the very oxygen of humanity. When she arrived in Geneva, the air was crisp, the lake glittering beneath a pale sun. She stood before a hall filled with leaders, engineers, educators, and activists. Cameras flashed, but she barely noticed them. She began softly, her voice carrying the steady calm she had learned to wield. "When I was asked to speak about respect, I didn't think of policies or codes. I thought of a 10-year-old boy sitting beside me on a flight, my son watching adults forget how to see a person beyond their assumptions. Respect isn't about tolerance. It's about recognition, the ability to see someone fully and not flinch." The hall was silent. She continued, "We can't legislate empathy, but we can teach awareness. We can't erase bias, but we can design against its reach. And when systems forget what fairness looks like, people must remind them." Her closing words echoed long after she left the stage. Justice isn't found in the air we breathe. It's in how we choose to share it. The speech went viral overnight. But more than the applause or headlines, Naomi cherished the handwritten letters that followed from young women in South Africa, engineers in Japan, students in Brazil. One read, "You made fairness sound like something we could all build." Back home in Denver, Naomi resumed her quiet life. She taught ethics once a week at the university, lecturing to a packed classroom of students who recorded her every word. But she always told them the same thing. "The point isn't to memorize my story. It's to write yours." One snowy evening, as she prepared dinner, she received a surprise call from Rebecca Hayes. "Naomi," Rebecca said softly, "I just wanted you to know I became an instructor for the Horizon certification. I teach flight attendants how to de-escalate bias incidents." Naomi smiled. "That's wonderful. Rebecca, truly." Rebecca hesitated. "I wanted to thank you again for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it." Naomi paused. "Forgiveness isn't a reward. Rebecca. It's a release. For both of us." When she hung up, Naomi felt something unspoken settle inside her, a quiet closure she hadn't realized she still needed. That night, the snow fell thicker. Naomi lit a fire, wrapped herself in a blanket, and opened the letter she'd been writing to Eli for years, a letter she intended to give him when he turned 18. She added a few final lines. "My son, when the world tries to make you smaller, remember that dignity doesn't shrink. It expands when tested. Don't fight to be seen. Build systems that see. The sky will always remember those who refuse to bow their heads." She folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the envelope marked for Eli, "When he's ready. Later." She stepped outside, the cold air biting her cheeks. Above her, the night was vast, the stars scattered like memories. She thought of all the voices that had joined hers, the passengers, the witnesses, the reformers, even those who once opposed her. Every one of them had become part of something larger than justice. As she stood there, she whispered, "It wasn't about winning. It was about reminding the sky who we are." And for a fleeting second, as a plane crossed the heavens, its lights blinking through the falling snow, Naomi felt that same stillness she'd known once before, the moment between humiliation and courage, silence and action. Only this time, it wasn't heavy. It was peace. "Inside," Eli called out from the piano. "Mom, come listen. I learned your favorite song." She smiled and stepped back into the warm light of home. The melody filled the air, a slow, tender tune that rose like forgiveness itself. Naomi closed her eyes and listened, letting the music carry her. The fight was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever looked up and believed the sky could change. Spring sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the university auditorium, painting warm gold across the rows of students gathering for Dr. Naomi Carter's final lecture of the semester. The space buzzed softly with excitement. Some were here for the credit. Others simply wanted to hear the woman whose story had reshaped an industry. Naomi stood behind the lectern, her notes untouched, her voice calm, but carrying the quiet gravity of someone who had lived her lessons long before teaching them. "When we talk about ethics," she began, "we're not talking about rules. We're talking about reflection, about pausing long enough to ask, am I seeing this person clearly, or am I seeing my own bias projected onto them? Every injustice starts with someone forgetting how to see." The room fell completely silent. Phones stopped recording for a moment, as if the students didn't want technology to interrupt something sacred. Naomi smiled faintly, scanning the crowd. "Ethics isn't a subject," she continued. "It's a habit. The more you practice fairness, the easier it becomes to recognize when it's missing." After the class ended, students surrounded her with questions, notebooks open, pens racing. One young man asked, "Dr. Carter, do you ever think the world will be free of bias?" Naomi tilted her head, thoughtful. "No," she said gently. "But that's not failure. The goal isn't perfection. It's persistence. Every time we act with awareness, we move the line of fairness forward, even if only an inch." Later, as the hall emptied, a woman in her 50s approached, gray hair neatly tied, eyes soft with gratitude. "Dr. Carter, I'm the mother of that girl you spoke with at the museum last year. She's now studying aerospace engineering. She says she wants to fly fair." Naomi's chest tightened with warmth. Then maybe the sky's already in good hands. Outside, the campus trees swayed in the breeze. Naomi walked slowly toward her car, the sound of laughter echoing behind her. Each voice reminded her that legacy wasn't built from grand moments. It was built from repetition, from teaching the same truth until it became instinct. That evening, back home, Eli was sprawled on the living room rug surrounded by mechanical parts. He was designing something, a small drone with wide wings, taped drawings of circuitry beside him. "Another project?" Naomi asked with a teasing smile. He grinned without looking up. "Kind of. It's a drone that scans for weather changes and adjusts flight paths automatically, like empathy, but for the sky." Naomi laughed softly, sinking into the couch. "Empathy for the sky. I like that." He looked up at her then, eyes serious. "You know what my teacher said today," she said. "History doesn't repeat itself. It remembers who stood up first." "That was about you." Her throat tightened. "Your teacher's very kind. No, she's right. You stood up first." Naomi looked away, blinking against the memory of that morning on Flight 281. The tension, the humiliation, the moment she decided silence was no longer an option. "Maybe I did," she whispered, "but a lot of people stood with me after. That's how we made it matter." Over the next few weeks, she juggled teaching, consulting, and finishing her manuscript. She titled the final chapter, "The Sound of Wings." It was about what courage sounded like, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet resolve that hums beneath someone choosing to do what's right, even when no one's watching. The publisher wanted a book tour, but Naomi hesitated. She'd promised herself peace after years of activism. Still, when Caroline called and said, "You owe people your story in your own words," Naomi agreed. The tour began modestly: libraries, community centers, small-town universities. Each stop brought people who wanted to share their own stories of bias and bravery. A retired pilot told her he'd implemented her guidelines across his airline. A teacher said her students now studied Horizon Labs in ethics class. One elderly woman simply hugged Naomi and whispered, "You helped me forgive the world." It was in Seattle, on the 5th stop, that Naomi experienced an unexpected twist. As she stepped off stage after her reading, a young reporter approached her with a small package. "Dr. Carter, this was delivered to our office this morning. The sender said you'd know what it means. Curious." Naomi opened it later that night in her hotel room. Inside was a single first-class boarding pass seat 3A encased in clear glass. Beneath it was a note. "From one lesson to another. Thank you for giving flight to those who once couldn't board." He. Naomi sat still for a long moment. Rebecca Hayes. Her reformation had gone farther than Naomi ever imagined. It wasn't guilt, it was gratitude transformed into tribute. Naomi placed the glass case on the nightstand and whispered, "You learned, Rebecca. You really did." The following week, Naomi returned to Denver. Caroline met her at the airport, both women smiling at the irony of greeting each other where the story had once begun. "You realize," Caroline said, "you've come full circle. From the passenger who was denied a seat to the woman whose name is now etched into aviation law." Naomi smiled. Life loves symmetry. They shared quiet laughter as they walked toward baggage claim. Naomi stopped suddenly, noticing a small group gathered near Gate D17, the same gate from years ago. A plaque now hung on the wall in honor of Dr. Naomi Carter and the Equal Skies Act. May every passenger be treated with dignity and respect. She stepped closer, her reflection shimmering in the polished metal. For a brief second, she saw her younger self staring back the woman who had once stood there trembling with disbelief, clutching her son's hand. Eli tugged her sleeve. "Mom," he said softly, "that's where it happened. Isn't it, yes?" she whispered. "Right there." He smiled faintly. "It doesn't look scary anymore." Naomi took his hand. That's because it's ours now." They stood there until the crowd thinned. Then Naomi reached out and touched the plaque gently, her fingers tracing the engraved words. "Never forget," she murmured. Months later, her book Altitude and Grace debuted to critical acclaim. Readers described it as a hymn to quiet strength and a map for rebuilding faith in humanity. She declined television interviews, preferring to speak through classrooms and mentorship programs. The royalties went directly into the Horizon Foundation, funding scholarships for underrepresented students in tech and aviation. On the day of the foundation's first graduation ceremony, Naomi gave the keynote address. The room was filled with young faces, hopeful, determined, unafraid. She spoke without notes, her voice steady, clear. "When I boarded that flight years ago, I thought justice would come from punishment. I was wrong. Justice comes from participation, from showing up over and over until the world adjusts its altitude." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Among them, she spotted Caroline wiping her eyes, Miles nodding with quiet pride, and Eli standing tall in the front row, recording every word. That night, back home, she stepped outside once more. The city lights shimmered below, and above, the stars burned bright. Naomi tilted her head toward the open sky, whispering, "We kept our promise." Somewhere in the distance, a plane crossed the night, its lights blinking rhythmically, a heartbeat against the darkness. And in that sound, Naomi heard everything she had fought for: the hum of progress, the echo of equality, the steady rhythm of wings unburdened by prejudice. It was no longer just her story. It was everyone's. The morning began like any other soft light pouring through the curtains, a kettle hissing faintly, Eli's laughter echoing from the hallway. "Dr." Naomi Carter stirred her tea absently, her mind half in the present, half drifting through the dozen years that had carried her from that fateful flight to this calm, ordinary day. The world outside had shifted so much, laws rewritten, training protocols standardized, even AI-driven empathy programs named after her research. But inside, she still carried the same quiet question that had driven her since the beginning. Was it enough? Her phone buzzed. A new message blinked across the screen. "Invitation, AeroLink Global Ceremony, 25th Anniversary of Equal Skies." She stared at it, smiling faintly. 25 years. It didn't feel that long. Yet everything in her life had changed. Eli was grown now, a senior aerospace engineer working on sustainable flight technology for NASA. He still called her every Sunday, though lately his schedule kept him more in the skies than on the ground. As if summoned by thought, the phone rang again. "Mom," Eli's voice came, warm and quick. "I just sent you something. Check your inbox." Naomi clicked the email and froze. Attached was a photograph of a prototype aircraft with smooth silver wings, the name Carter Row 1 engraved near the nose. Below it was his message: "It flies next month." And it only felt right to name it after the woman who taught me that flight isn't just about height, it's about humanity. Tears pricked Naomi's eyes. "Eli," she whispered. "You didn't," he interrupted, his voice softening. "I did. Because none of us would be flying this high if you hadn't grounded the world when it forgot how to stand." Naomi smiled, words caught in her throat. "You've outdone me, son." "Not possible," he said. "I'll pick you up tomorrow. They want you at the launch." When he hung up, Naomi stood for a long while, the photo still glowing on her screen. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like an old friend returning. The next day, a car waited at her doorstep. Eli stepped out, taller and broader than she remembered. His confident stride softened by a boyish grin. He hugged her tightly, murmuring, still shorter than your courage. They drove to the test facility just outside Houston. The hangar was immense, sunlight pouring through its open doors. Engineers and journalists moved in a flurry of quiet excitement. In the center stood the prototype, the Carter 01 Sleek, luminous, and unlike any aircraft Naomi had ever seen. Its engines were whisper quiet, designed to cut emissions to nearly zero. Eli led her toward it. "Mom, this isn't just my project. It's a continuation of yours. We embedded Horizon's equity protocols into the flight AI. The plane makes decisions using ethical prioritization. Human safety and fairness coded into every operation. No one's excluded. Ever." Naomi blinked, overwhelmed. "You coded conscience into the sky." He smiled. "You gave me the blueprint." As the ceremony began, Caroline Rivera appeared, her hair now streaked with silver, but her poise unchanged. "Naomi," she greeted warmly, "I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Still leading revolutions." "I see." Naomi chuckled. "I just raised one." Caroline squeezed her hand. "You know, it's funny. We started by grounding one flight, and now we're launching one that might redefine aviation itself." When the announcer called Naomi to the stage, applause filled the air. She stood before the crowd, her voice steady but laced with emotion. 25 years ago, she began, I was asked to leave a seat I had rightfully earned. Today, I stand beside a generation that refuses to let anyone be asked that again. We learned that technology isn't progress unless it carries compassion. We learned that fairness is not a luxury, it's the engine of our shared future. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the crowd, she saw Eli's proud, tear-bright smile. Later, as the plane prepared for its maiden flight, Naomi stood near the runway. Eli climbed into the cockpit, his voice crackling through the intercom. "Mom, you ready?" She laughed softly. "I've been ready since 3A. The engines hummed gentle, harmonic, almost melodic. The aircraft lifted smoothly, rising into the morning sky. The sound wasn't loud or triumphant. It was calm, almost reverent. Naomi felt her heart lift with it. Caroline whispered beside her, "You realize the first woman to be kicked out of first class just watched a plane named after her take its first flight?" Naomi smiled, tears glinting. Maybe the sky finally apologized. As the Carter 01 ascended, its silver body glinting like a promise, Naomi thought of the long path that had led here: humiliation, resistance, reform, and now renewal. For a moment, she imagined all those who had been part of her journey: Rebecca Hayes, who had written every year until her passing; Miles Freeman, whose mentorship had become legend; Caroline, who had never stopped fighting beside her. They were all here in some invisible way, stitched into the horizon. When the aircraft returned to the ground, Eli jumped down from the steps and ran to her. "Perfect flight," he said breathlessly. "Not a single error." Naomi cupped his face in her hands. "It's beautiful. You did it." He grinned. "No, we did." That evening, a small reception followed. Guests toasted the launch, laughter spilling into the soft hum of music. Naomi slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The sunset painted the sky in bands of orange and rose. She stood there, breathing deeply, when a young intern approached timidly. "Dr. Carter," the girl said, "I wanted to thank you. I'm here because of your scholarship. My mother showed me your story when I was little. I promised her I'd earn my own seat, and now I'm designing the control interface for the next Horizon system." Naomi smiled, her voice tender. "Then my story's already become yours, That's the best ending it could have. As night settled, Eli joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" She nodded, gazing up at the stars, just thinking how quiet the sky feels tonight. He smiled. "That's not quiet. Mom, that's peace." They stood together until the crowd inside faded into murmurs. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out the glass case containing the old boarding pass seat 3A. The plaque beneath it caught the moonlight. She whispered to Eli, "You know, this isn't just a reminder of what they took away. It's proof of what we reclaimed." He looked at her, eyes shining. "You kept it all these years." "I had to," she said softly. "It was the moment I learned how to rise without leaving the ground." The wind shifted gently, carrying the faint echo of turbines from the test field. Naomi closed her eyes, listening. For the first time, the sound didn't remind her of fear or fight. It reminded her of faith, the quiet kind that endures after justice, after history, after applause. The next morning, as she and Eli drove away from the facility, she glanced at him and said, "Promise me something, anything. When the next generation forgets why fairness matters, you'll remind them. You'll tell them what the sky used to be before it learned compassion." Eli smiled. "I'll do better than that. I'll keep building skies that remember." Naomi looked out the window at the open horizon, the clouds glowing in the distance like unspoken words. "Good," she whispered, "because stories fade, but systems last." As they drove on, the Carter 01 streaked across the morning sky above them, sunlight gleaming on its wings. Naomi watched it until it vanished, a single tear sliding down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the rarest kind of peace, knowing that the sky, at last, had learned to write its own redemption. The wind at the Cape Canaveral launch site carried the faint scent of salt and fuel, that rare mixture of science and sea. Naomi Carter stood beneath the morning sun, her gray curls caught in the light, her eyes focused on the towering rocket that gleamed against the blue horizon. It was the culmination of decades of progress, and on its silver flank, painted in deep blue letters, was a name that made her breath hitch: the Carter Initiative. Eli stood beside her, dressed in his flight engineer uniform. His face carried the calm focus of a man who had spent his life building what others only dared to imagine. "They named the program after you," he said softly, watching her expression. Naomi's lips curved into a faint, incredulous smile. "I thought they might have run out of names." He chuckled. "Hardly. This one earned it. The Carter Initiative wasn't just a space program. It was the first intercontinental aerospace collaboration that prioritized ethics in autonomous flight systems. Every decision, from launch to landing, had fairness, safety, and sustainability coded into its framework, a living legacy of the Horizon Project and the Equal Skies Act. The new shuttle Unity 9 would become the first craft to operate with a fully transparent AI conscience system. As they waited for the pre-launch briefing, Caroline Rivera approached, her gait steady, her eyes shining with pride. "Naomi, you did it. Again." Naomi shook her head. "We did it. Caroline, you carried this when I was ready to rest." Caroline smiled. "And now the world is catching up to what you saw 25 years ago." She paused, lowering her voice. "You should know. The UN just passed the Global Empathy Standard. Every airline, every autonomous transport system will be required to undergo Horizon certification." Naomi's eyes widened. "That's law now." Caroline nodded. "Unanimous vote. Your speech in Geneva started it." Naomi's throat tightened. "I never thought words could outlive their speaker." "They can," Caroline said gently. If they're true enough, the intercom crackled. Dr. Carter. Engineer Carter, please report to Control Deck B. They exchanged a look, both smiling at the symmetry of their titles, mother and son, sharing the same name on different credentials. Inside the control center, large glass panels revealed the rocket shimmering in sunlight. The countdown clock blinked steadily. Final system check complete. A voice reported, AI ethics core stable. Launch authorization sequence engaged. Eli turned to his mother. Mom, there's something else. You've been asked to deliver the launch command. Naomi blinked. Me. He nodded. They said this began with you grounding a flight to demand fairness. It's only right that you send one skyward to honor it. She felt her heart twist with quiet emotion. From grounding injustice to launching integrity, she murmured, life does love irony. As the countdown began, Naomi placed her hand over the microphone. Unity 9. This is Dr. Naomi Carter. On behalf of every person who's ever been told they don't belong, I give you permission to rise. May your ascent remind the world that equality isn't gravity, it's grace. Her voice trembled slightly, but the moment it echoed through the speakers, the control room erupted in cheers. The engines ignited, flames roaring beneath the rocket as it lifted from the pad, ascending into the bright Florida sky. The crowd outside gasped in awe, the brilliance of the launch reflecting off their tear-streaked faces. Naomi's breath caught as the shuttle disappeared into the clouds, leaving a thin white trail like a signature against the blue. Eli whispered, She flies. Naomi smiled, her voice barely a whisper. She remembers. Hours later, as the launch data streamed in flawless readings, 0 errors. Caroline raised a glass of water in quiet tribute. To the woman who taught the sky how to be kind. Naomi laughed softly. To the team who reminded it how to listen. That evening, the team gathered for a dinner beneath the stars. The Atlantic shimmered nearby, waves whispering against the shore. Naomi sat quietly, listening to the younger engineers debate ethics and algorithms with the kind of idealism that had once burned inside her. It filled her with pride and something gentler, too. Closure, maybe. Eli leaned closer. They're saying Unity 9 will be transmitting its first atmospheric empathy data tonight. The AI will report how it felt during flight. Naomi arched an eyebrow. Machines feeling not emotions, he clarified. Reflections. It's designed to observe its decisions and explain them in plain language, sort of like accountability with consciousness. Naomi nodded slowly. Then maybe the world has learned after all. Later, when most of the guests had gone, she and Eli walked along the beach. The air was cool, the stars glittering like distant promises. Mom, he said, his voice quieter now. You know there's something about the Unity 9 I didn't tell you. She smiled knowingly. You've always got one last surprise. He grinned. Its internal guidance system, the one that ensures balanced passenger algorithms, it's named Naomi. It learns by asking, what would Naomi choose? Naomi stopped walking. You didn't, she whispered, her voice breaking into laughter and tears at once. I did, he said softly, because I wanted every flight to remember the question you taught me to ask before every decision, is it fair? Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her chest. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. They stood in silence, watching the reflection of the stars ripple across the water. A shooting star streaked across the horizon. Quick and bright, Naomi whispered. For every sky that once refused us. Now we're part of it. When they returned to the hotel, Naomi found a letter waiting at her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat but unsteady. She opened it carefully. "Dear Dr. Carter, my grandmother was a flight attendant on your plane, Flight 281. Her name was Linda Foster. She was the security officer that day. Before she passed, she told me she never forgot your grace in the middle of chaos. She said she saw courage that changed how she saw herself. She wanted you to know she carried your story her whole life. Thank you for changing hers." Naomi held the letter close, her eyes shimmering. "Linda," she whispered, remembering the woman who had tried, imperfectly but earnestly, to keep control that day. She found her peace. Eli came out of the adjoining room, curious. "Everything okay?" Naomi smiled softly. "Better than okay." The sky's still writing back. He looked puzzled, but she didn't explain. Some stories didn't need retelling. They simply needed to be lived forward. The next morning, she watched the sunrise from her balcony. The horizon glowed pink and gold, waves folding over each other in rhythm. Somewhere far above, Unity 9 circled the earth, transmitting lines of code that spoke of balance, humanity, and fairness. Naomi whispered to the wind. We kept rising. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the Global Council requesting Dr. Naomi Carter's presence for the International Ethics Summit, Tokyo 2026. She chuckled to herself. So much for retirement. As the light grew stronger, Naomi felt a quiet certainty settle over her heart. The sky had once humiliated her, then it had listened, and now it carried her voice in every algorithm that guided humanity's ascent. She picked up her tea, savoring its warmth, and whispered the words she'd come to believe more than any others. Kindness is the highest altitude. The air in Tokyo carried a kind of delicate order, clean, intentional, alive with quiet energy. Dr. Naomi Carter watched the city stretch beneath her from the window of her hotel suite, the skyline pulsing with light and motion. She had come for what would likely be her final keynote address at the International Ethics Summit, an event that had grown into the global gathering place for leaders in technology, law, and humanity. This year's theme was simple yet profound, designing the future with dignity. As she stood at the window, her reflection merged with the glittering city beyond a woman, both within and beyond her time. Her hair was fully silver now, her movements slower, but her mind sharper than ever. She was scheduled to speak last, the closing voice, as they called it, though she suspected it was really a gentle way of saying farewell. There was a knock at the door. Eli stepped in, carrying a briefcase and his easy smile. He looked older now, with faint lines around his eyes, but the same warmth radiated from him. "You ready?" Mom Naomi smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." He grinned. "You've said that before. Every historic moment of your life." She laughed quietly. "Maybe that's why they all turned out just fine." He handed her a small lapel pin shaped like a wing. "It's the emblem for the Carter Initiative. We had it made in gold this time." She pinned it gently over her heart, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you. Eli, you always know how to make endings feel like beginnings." When they arrived at the Tokyo International Forum, the air buzzed with anticipation. Delegates from nearly every nation filled the grand hall. The massive screen above the stage projected her name, Dr. Naomi Carter, founder, the Horizon Project, architect of the Equal Skies Act. A hush fell as she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight catching the faint shimmer of her pin. She began softly, her voice calm, deliberate, but carrying the weight of a lifetime. When I first stood on a plane 25 years ago, I wasn't thinking about policy or justice or history. I was thinking about survival, about my son's eyes watching me, and what they would learn from my silence. The crowd leaned in, every word landing like a heartbeat. I didn't realize, then, that standing up for yourself sometimes means standing still long enough for the truth to catch up. The world changes not when we fight for power, but when we protect dignity. She paused, looking out at the audience. Since that day, I've watched technology rise faster than our empathy, but we've also proven that kindness can scale just as powerfully. The systems we build remember what we teach them. The question is, what do we want them to remember? Her eyes found Eli in the crowd, smiling quietly. My son once told me that empathy is the sky's new engine. I think he's right. She closed with a sentence that drew thunderous applause. The future is not built by those who reach first. It's built by those who reach fairly. Afterward, reporters swarmed. Photographers captured the way she laughed easily with young delegates, how she listened to each one as though they were equals. One journalist asked, "Dr. Carter, after everything you've done, what's left for you to accomplish?" Naomi smiled softly. "To rest," she said, "but not before teaching the next generation to take off without me." That evening, Eli found her on the balcony of their hotel, sipping tea as the neon glow reflected on her face. "You were incredible," he said. She chuckled. "Flattery still works." "Huh, I mean it." "Mom, that speech people are saying it'll define the decade." She looked at him tenderly. "No speech defines anything. Eli, it's what people do after the applause that matters." He nodded, thoughtful. "You know, the AI ethics division at NASA wants to name their new learning model after you." Naomi smiled wistfully. "The machines keep remembering me. Maybe that's enough immortality." The wind rustled gently, and she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. "Do you ever miss the days when it was just us, you, me, a suitcase, and a world that didn't know who we were?" Eli's voice softened. "Every day. But then I remember those days made everything else possible." She reached out, squeezing his hand. "Promise me, when I'm gone, you'll keep building things that see everyone." He nodded. "Always." The next morning, Naomi woke early and took a quiet walk through Shinjuku-gyoen Garden. The cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom, pale pink petals drifting gently in the breeze. She sat on a bench, closing her eyes, feeling the stillness. For the first time in years, her mind wasn't planning, fixing, or leading. She just breathed. When she returned to her hotel, she found a note slipped under the door. It was written in careful, flowing English. "Dr. Carter, I am Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, pilot of the Unity 9's final mission. I wanted you to know that before every flight, I tell my crew what you said years ago: fairness isn't gravity, it's grace. I make them repeat it, out loud, before takeoff. The skies are safer because of you." Naomi read the letter twice, then pressed it to her chest. "Fairness is grace," she murmured. It really did take flight. That afternoon, she and Eli boarded their return flight home. As they settled into their seats, Naomi gazed out the window. The plane taxied smoothly, the hum of the engines low and soothing. For a moment, she remembered the fear she once felt in that same position decades ago, in a different cabin, when humiliation had nearly crushed her. But now, the air felt different. It was hers. Halfway through the flight, Eli nudged her gently. "Mom, look, outside." A plane was flying parallel to theirs for a few moments before veering off into the clouds. Its tail bore the horizon emblem, a small circle of silver wings. Naomi smiled faintly. Our skies crowded with conscience now. When the plane touched down in Denver, the sun was setting. The horizon glowed a deep orange, fading into violet. As they stepped off the jet bridge, Naomi paused, placing a hand on the cool glass wall beside her. "Full circle," she whispered. Over the following weeks, she returned to teaching part-time and mentoring young advocates through the Horizon Fellowship. She refused interviews, preferring small classrooms to grand stages. One afternoon, while helping a student revise her thesis, Naomi suddenly felt lightheaded. She steadied herself on the desk and smiled gently. "Don't worry," she told the student. "Even the strongest engines need rest." She went home early that day. Eli came by that evening, bringing dinner and laughter. They talked late into the night about his upcoming Mars project, about her garden, about everything and nothing. When he left, she kissed his cheek and said, "Keep your eyes on the horizon, my love." The next morning, Naomi Carter passed peacefully in her sleep. News spread across the world. Major networks paused their broadcasts for a moment of silence. Airports dimmed their lights for 60 seconds, and airlines across continents displayed her quote on digital boards: "Kindness is the highest altitude." At her memorial, Eli spoke to a hall packed with people whose lives she had touched. "My mother once said justice wasn't about shouting. It was about staying human when it's easier not to be." She didn't just change systems. She taught the sky itself how to remember compassion. When the ceremony ended, Eli walked to the garden where her ashes were to be scattered. The day was bright, the air warm. As the wind lifted the petals into the air, he whispered, "Goodbye, Mom. The world learned to see because you refused to disappear." Above him, a plane passed overhead, silent, steady, gliding effortlessly through the clear blue. For a brief second, the contrail curved, forming what looked like a winged heart before dissolving into the light. And in that fleeting shape, it felt as though the sky itself had whispered back, "Thank you for teaching me to care." The story of Dr. Naomi Carter teaches us that dignity is not given, it's chosen. When faced with prejudice and humiliation, she didn't answer anger with rage, nor injustice with hate. She chose calm, reason, and truth, and in doing so, she reminded the world that strength doesn't always shout. It often speaks softly but never bends. For older generations, this story is a quiet reflection of life's hardest truth. We cannot control how others see us, but we can always choose how we respond. True justice begins not with outrage, but with self-respect. Naomi's journey reminds us that every act of fairness, no matter how small, can ripple outward, changing hearts, systems, and even skies. So when life tests your patience, when the world feels unfair, remember this: integrity is the loudest voice in the room, even when spoken in a whisper. And sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins with the decision to remain kind. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. If it touched your heart or made you reflect, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us tell more stories that inspire kindness, courage, and hope. Your support keeps these powerful voices alive and reminds the world that empathy still matters. So, join our community, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep spreading stories that lift people higher. Because together, we can make the world just a little more human.